The New York State Department of Transportation presents the DOT POD.
And welcome into the DOT POD. I'm Josh Heller.
And I'm Anya Cardos.
And we are delighted to have you joining us. Well, as DOT works to rebuild and enhance our vast transportation network in New York, we're often reminded that our state has a rich history far older than our modern infrastructure. And sometimes our project reveal just what life was like hundreds, even maybe thousands of years ago. And today, we're digging into that kind of discovery and the discoveries that are being made as we shape our transportation system.
So today we're joined by environmental specialists Sean Higgins and Kyle Sommerville, who are both with DOT's Office of Environment, to shed some light on how the department is preserving cultural heritage and artifacts amid our goals for modernization and progress. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So why don't we kick things off a little bit by getting to know you better. Sean, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm Sean Higgins. I started with DOT probably about 6 years ago now, and prior to that, I worked at New York State Education Department, the New York State Museum, as an archaeologist. I was there for almost 15 years, just excavating around the state, usually for DOT projects, but we also worked with OGS and other state agencies, DEC, ahead of state projects. So primarily with DOT, we did bridge replacements and archaeological surveys to assess what was there or what's not there, ahead of these projects, which was great. But my background is an archaeologist. I have my master's from SUNY Albany. My personal research, I still do some field work from time to time, is in Central America. I work in Belize, and I've worked in Mexico.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's great. I love doing it. This summer, actually, I'm probably going back down to Belize, probably for my last field season. I'm getting older, so archaeology hurts.
Lots of hands and knees work, and
yeah,
you're
lower
really
backs and shoulders
all the time.
Yep. So, it's exciting work. It's great to stay in the field here. Not on the archaeology side, not digging anymore, but being involved in the process to assure NYSDOT is doing what it has to address historic remains.
Right. Make sure that every time we do any kind of digging or moving ground, that we're doing it in a respectful manner and also preserving what we do have here.
What kind of things have you found? And DOT projects, well, I guess we'll start with that, but also down in South America, what are some of the things that you found?
Well, so up here, we find a lot of roadside debris. Primarily where we work is within the right-of-way or just outside of it. And we have found archaeological sites right up the road edge. It does happen. In Central America, most of my work is very is early. It's not, it's pre-ceramic. So all you're going to have left are mostly tools. So there, my interests are in diet and food resources and how that helped shed light on developing social complexity down there, which is an interesting topic, at least for me and some other archaeologists. But so we use bone remains to determine what was being eaten and how that signals changes in social complexity, access to resources, things like that. But in terms of artifacts, it's mostly projectile points, arrowheads, other stone tools. Those are what preserve that early. So, it's interesting. It's not monumental. I guess it's not some lost city, but it helps paint a picture of what happened back then.
What I always find interesting when I travel, I don't travel too much out of the country, but we think our perception of what's old in the United States is not at all. Yeah. Yep. Our old is not that old. You go to, the civilizations down in Central and South America. You go to Europe and even more so you head towards the Fertile Crescent in those areas. We're talking old.
Yeah.
Here in the States, we're like, oh yeah, no, it was old. It's a couple hundred years old. And like, oh yeah, but
about a couple thousand.
That's nothing. So it has to, especially when you're down there, put things in perspective a little bit.
It does, and not to take up too much time, but I did a little time in Scotland, helping a friend with her master's research, and it was my first time over in that side of the ocean, and you walk around a cemetery that's got burials, to the 1200s. It's
Right.
wild. We don't have that here, so it's neat. That's definitely, it puts things in a different perspective for sure.
Sure. Kyle, tell us a little about yourself and your background.
Well, actually, like Sean, my background's in archaeology. I'm much more interested in historic remains. Farmsteads and industrial sites are kind of what I'm really interested in. I got my degree, my doctorate from the University of Buffalo, and I started DOT in 2018. Before that, I did consulting archaeology, mostly in the western central part of New York State. Not anything exotic, unfortunately, but a couple cool projects I worked on. We worked on the Whitmer Farm, which is where Mormonism was organized up in Seneca County. And I worked on a cemetery relocation in the Bronx, and it was really fascinating to see because you see how people are buried, what they're buried with, and that kind of reflects their beliefs in life. Unfortunately, it was kind of a brutal removal because the soil's very hard and the bones aren't all that great in condition. But it's just really interesting to see how we what we believe in life and how that follows us into death, basically. So. Nothing super exotic, unfortunately, but it is what it is up here for sure.
You're talking about something that we refer to here at DOT as cultural resources. We touched on this at the beginning of our show, how you strike a balance between respecting history and artifacts and the work that we have to do here because, let's face it, we have an aging infrastructure in New York State, and we need to modernize and make sure that everyone's safe when they're getting from point A to point B. What is cultural resources in terms of what we're talking about today? If both of you guys can address that.
So cultural resources, as a blanket thing, is any remains of human past, essentially. So archaeological sites, historic buildings. If you want to look at indigenous peoples, areas that might have social significance tied to them. It's really just an overall blanket for anything human related that is left behind for us to encounter.
And it's kind of not necessarily a hierarchy of importance, but some sites are more important than others, what they can tell us about the past. For example, not every sort of campsite or, lithic scatter that we find is going to be considered historic, even if we have to do an archaeological survey and remove it. And, as kind of an aside, archaeology itself is very destructive. It destroys a resource, basically. So we really only kind of want to do that when we really have to. But again, not every site is the same. So some sites can tell us more about the past if they have good integrity. There's a lot, there's datable artifacts. There's a lot of artifacts. They're in a particular location that we don't really know all that much about. So it's unfortunately, we will destroy these sites even if they are important. So that's why under 106, some of these sites have a little bit more consideration than others. And that goes for structures like bridges, culverts, that sort of thing, buildings, building foundations, other sort of features, wells, and all that. So we take all this into consideration when we're doing the consultation process.
Can you explain what Section 106 is so that people have an understanding of what you mean by that?
Sure. And Sean, feel free to correct me if I get anything incorrect. But it's basically Section 106 just requires federal agencies to consider historic properties in any sort of activity or undertaking that they go through. So part of that, and it is a process, and you do have to work with our state partners and tribal partners and local partners a lot of times, but it is fairly open-ended. You don't necessarily have to do an archaeological survey every single time you open Section 106 consultation. But usually when we're disturbing new soil, or, it depends on the work scope, but usually when there's new soil disturbance, we usually order an archaeological survey to make sure we're not destroying anything that may be significant. And if it may be significant in this first survey, then we'll order additional surveys if necessary to kind of figure out if this is actually significant and if it deserves special protection.
I'm curious on this, and I don't want to say the word adversarial because I do think that's a bit too strong, but what you guys do and the importance of that does kind of butt up against, what the projects might be. So, Sean, you were talking about that sidewalk project, and, they found an old tavern there. And I'm sure when you found that, it was like, this is awesome. And I'm sure that most of the people who are working on it were like, this not as awesome now because they have budgets they have to keep to. They have timelines and deadlines they have to meet. And so there has to be kind of a delicate balance of, making sure that, we're still able to provide that service to the public that was our job to do, but at the same time, following that Section 106, being able to to make sure that we do take care with these things that we find.
Yeah, sure. So, well, building on what Kyle said first, so Section 106 is the federal version. What we have to follow when there's federal funding. The counterpart is Section 1409 when it's only 100% state funded. So, we might hear us interchangeably refer to that, and listeners may hear 1409, 106. May not
Thanks
understand it,
that.
but they are so there are differences. But both so. But going back to answer your question, we often run into issues with scheduling, budgeting, things like
I feel
that.
like you would be like, oh, I hope we find something. And they're like, oh, I hope we don't.
Yeah. And,
Right.
But thankfully, the requirements of Section 106 and 1409 are that we need to have these completed to achieve design approval. And because of that, these processes are started usually pretty early in the design process. So a project might get scoped and they have a good idea. The designers and the regions may have a good idea of what is being proposed and how they're going to do it. And if that information's early enough, we can address these things to minimize the impacts to scheduling. But it certainly is a challenge if things are encountered. If a archaeological site's encountered and you need a data recovery, which is the last phase of excavations, that can really slow down a project, and you can't construct it until those excavations are done. So we work within the regions. I worked in a region for almost 5 years. I know the challenges it is working with a designer, trying to get ideas of where the impacts are and what the impacts are, and trying to dial those into a way forward with completing 106 and our requirements to address the historic resources.
This kind of partnership between all of the regions was really highlighted in one project that you both worked on together, and this was a bridge project, total replacement of a bridge in Broom County. Describe this project and what made it so unique, and some of the archaeological finds that were basically found at this site, lifted from this site. Talk about that. What were the origins of this?
As you said, it was a total bridge replacement, and basically everything that could go wrong with this project went wrong with this project. But it was a really great learning experience, even from beyond Section 106 with endangered species and that sort of thing, and permitting issues and all that. It was just a really, really involved project. But for Section 106, we had a lot going on. The bridge itself was individually eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, so that needed special consideration when we were removing it, and that needed special mitigation. There's archaeological sites all up and down the river there in our particular region down in Binghamton, and so since we're putting the bridge on a new alignment, we need to do an archaeological survey to make sure what was there. And that ended up going to what's called Phase 3 excavation, which is complete mitigation of the site and all artifacts that the archaeologists could get. And what they found was actually, it was really interesting to see. It was basically a seasonal camp that people came back to over a long period of time. So they found artifacts from I think the Archaic period, which is roughly 5,000 years ago. I'm not up to date with the carbon dating and all that stuff, but from roughly that point to what's called the Woodland period, which is much more recent, like 1600 or so, like that. So people are coming back over an extended period of time. So this particular site had special meaning for them, probably, and from a spiritual point of view and from resource point of view.
Right.
And so
Along a river.
Yeah,
Makes
right along the
sense.
river. Yeah. So They found all sorts of plant remains, so we could kind of reconstruct maybe a little bit what the environment was like, but also when we had to do replanting of new species that were still using, native species that were already there. And that was part of our mitigation commitments too. And just we didn't really find a ton of food remains that I remember, but stone tools they found, also some non-local sources, which shows that this area was an important location for trade up and down the river, probably
That's
over an extended period of time. Yeah, but essentially what we did is, as part of our mitigation commitments, we actually ended up learning a whole lot about the past and the environment that was already there. So that was in. We wouldn't necessarily have done that if there was another survey. If we didn't have to do the survey, we never would have known that any of that information.
Another particular challenge, and I don't remember offhand, Kyle, and maybe you do, but this project had, like any other project, they look at a ton of different alternatives, and this had quite a few alternatives, and every one of them was going to impact an archaeological site. Not necessarily the same site, but just goes to show how important this river is, and this part of the southern tier is, in early times was super important, and the fact that every alternative investigated was gonna impact an archaeological site. How do you, now you have to try to figure out and negotiate how do you mitigate this? How do you choose the lesser of all the evils?
And how did you guys do that?
I probably came down to a design related thing. I don't know
ultimately,
the specifics. But...
yeah, I think it had to do with engineering and mitigating non-standard features of the roadway and the bridge and hydraulics and that sort of thing. So those were the overriding concerns, I think, for picking this particular alternative.
When you are presented with something like this prior to going in there, do you have any kind of preconceived notion that there's probably something here, or there might be something here, or do you go in, and I'm sure it's different for each project, but are you going in with fresh eyes, being like, I don't know what's here, we're gonna find out?
It's probably a little both.
Okay.
Kyle has more experience, obviously, in the southern tier, being in Region 9, but the southern tier and other portions of the state, Syracuse area, Utica too, and some Buffalo area. There's a lot of pre-contact activity. The landscape was perfect for settlement. So when you're putting in new infrastructure, a new bridge at a new location that's spanning an important waterway, and there's nothing there right now, chances are, in some of these areas, you're going to hit them. There are others that are maybe not quite as obvious. Like the Canastota example. I mean, that area has been dug up. It was an important route. It's part of the Seneca Trail. So there could be pre-contact material, and it's a very historic area, but it's built up. There's development. There's modern businesses, old homes. You don't. So you look at it and you're like, likelihood's probably pretty low. There's something here, but it could happen, and that's a challenge. But
this is land that was utilized for, as you said, thousands of years. There are tribal nations in the area where this bridge is. How did that communication and that work together grow over the period of this project?
Well, that's also another challenge too, because the tribal nations, that we kind of sometimes think of them as one sort of unified front, and that's not necessarily true. They all have their own interests, which are sometimes competing. And so we have maps and things that kind of show there's this area of interest, we call it, who considers it like their kind of their territory, their traditional territory. And so we reach out to them, and we solicit comments, from them. We say, hey, we're thinking we're going to order a survey here, like, please comment on this area. And they don't necessarily have to tell us anything. They, like, if they don't want us to dig somewhere, that's because they might know something that they don't have to share with us. Other times they're like, yes, this survey will work, but can you expand in this area? Can we have somebody on site from the nation to actually monitor during construction or during excavations and even during construction and that sort of thing? And so we work with them, and it's usually not difficult at all to get them out there if that's what they want. And over time, and even just from a personal standpoint, you kind of learn who the representatives are, and you kind of see, what they want out of a project generally. And so it becomes easier over time when you build these sort of personal relationships by working very, closely with them.
I want to talk a minute about the details of this project and sharing it with the public, because obviously that has to be important as well, the educational aspect of it. And oftentimes when I'm sure these things come out, they can be a bit dry. Oh, we found this and we found that. But you were able to bring this story to life by creating an interactive story map with photos and articles and artifacts that were discovered at the site and the history of the area. Tell us a bit about the story map and what it contains, and I guess how this idea was formulated and ultimately enacted.
Well, that's one of the beauties of Section 106 consultation, is that because it's not determinative, as long as you go through the process, you can kind of come to these sort of more creative solutions rather than just, doing an archaeological survey, writing a report, and wiping your hands of it. And, even speaking as an archaeologist, I'm not necessarily interested in reading a report either. They are very dry, and if you're not interested in the subject matter, like me, then I don't want to read it. And so the story map was kind of a way it was supposed to be written for, a lay audience, people who don't have any expertise, but would be interested in the history of the region, and to kind of tell the stories of the tribal nations who were there before and who it's their traditional land, or traditional territory rather. And so being able to use multimedia, pictures, drone videos, 3D artifact scans it seems like a much better way to reach the general public who's ultimately paying for this than just some dry report that's just going to be filed away that they're probably not going to be able to read because it's going to be locked away with SHPO basically. So very early on, I think in the process, we kind of determined that we wanted to do some sort of document. Which was originally going to be a printed sort of traditional thing, but then throughout consultation we decided, well, maybe it's better that we can kind of do something that's more reachable online. And so I know we were talking about it before, but the idea of putting up a kiosk, I think, was one of the ideas. But then even as we kept talking in our working group, comprised of the tribal nations, the State Historic Preservation Office, our region main office, and Federal Highway Administration, who's funding it, we decided, well, we can do this to a historic marker, but we can also, put a QR code in that would link to this document and make it broadly accessible to the public rather than a printout, which would just kind of, stay within the general area or a library or something like that. And so that it really just seemed like a kind of a no-brainer too, because then now we can add information to this document. So it's a living thing rather than just kind of being static. And so as we talked and through consultation over the months and things like that, what do we want to add? What can we add? So we have things like we have photos, obviously, of the site, but then somebody talked about, I think it might actually have been State Education Department, who's putting it together. Like, well, can we get 3D scans? And it's like, well, can we? So we reached out to SUNY Binghamton, their public archaeology facility, who did the archaeological survey, and they're like, yeah, we can do that. We have a scanning group. And so that was great. And then State Ed asked, can we put drone photo of them flying right over the river? That'd be a really kind of great way to grab the public. And so I don't know, can we? So we reached out and to PAF again, and they said, yeah, we can do that. We have a drone crew. So, and then that's what we ended up adding. So it was really a challenge basically from start to finish for a number of reasons, but we're really quite happy with what came out, and we think it, as a living document, I think that's kind of one of the most important aspects of this project.
And for listeners right now, they can go to the description of this particular podcast. We will have a link to that Enduring Connection story map, so they can go there directly. And highly recommend they do. By the way, it's really cool.
You talk about going a step further with this document that Josh just mentioned is called Enduring Connections. It's beautifully done. The videos are remarkable. The history of the people, the plant materials, the food, why this area was so special, and then artifact finds like I saw some tools, arrowheads, and you really get to know this area even if you may never go there yourself. So it's so well done, and I encourage everybody to look at it. What has the reaction been within DOT and beyond?
Well, I mean, within DOT, it's been very positive. Those who have viewed it were, very blown away, really, with what it was. And I'll admit, some of us were a little skeptical that this would work. We were given a strict deadline. We had to meet it, and I mean, Kyle did a great job herding, everybody to get this, moving and get it done. And it just, in terms of public comment, I haven't heard anything yet. But in terms of DOT, SHPO, State Ed, everyone, it turned out really great. What's also great about this, and both the story map and the QR code, we've never done anything like this before. We've never developed as an agency, or at least within OOE that we know of, no one's done a story map. So it was a hurdle. It was a big hurdle to jump over, and I mean, hopefully everyone will take a look at it. It turned out great.
Yeah. Maybe this is setting the tone.
It is.
For the way that we communicate. As Josh said, sometimes these projects, the details can be kind of dry. But if you afford people the opportunity to really get a look at what's behind the story, that changes things.
Yeah, and this type of mitigation really can pave the way for future mitigation. A big part of mitigation is meaningful mitigation, and very often an archaeological report or a building documentation, like, that sits on a shelf and no one's ever going to look at it. This is engaging, and I mean, it's used in other states around the country, but it can help set a tone for how we look at least mitigation for historic resources, but maybe for other environmental topics, any other topic too.
To kind of go back a little bit, just like this, the entire story map it's also a testament to like a teamwork as well. State Ed, Heather Clark and Daria Merwin did a fantastic job. They're the ones who really put it together, and they deserve full credit. But also, like, getting to that point was a total team effort. It was a real learning process, basically from start to finish. And the fact that we got something like this to come out of that, when we had kind of really a tight deadline, is really a testament to everybody's hard work on it.
And we cannot, cannot encourage enough people going to check that out. That will be, the link will be in our description. You can find that there, or head to our website. It's there, Enduring Connection. So you can click on that and head out there and see the result of the hard work and obviously the just the care that you guys have and the interest that you guys have in what you do. It certainly shines through in that document and just in this conversation as well. So I cannot thank both of you enough for taking some time and coming down here and talking to us and explaining to us not only what you do, but why it's so important. And hopefully this will this will encourage people to learn more about it.
That's right. History is very much alive here in New York State. And thanks to you, Sean and Kyle. Thank you. And all your partners on the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, that's just about going to do it for us here from the DOTPOD. Thanks so much for tuning in wherever you do tune in to your episodes. Really interesting one here today, Anya. Really fun.
Oh, this was fascinating. I love this kind of stuff. I'm hooked on, like, if I find a coin or something, I'm like excited about it. These are major finds, and it's a real testament to partnership here in New York.
And again, that link for Enduring Connections will be in the description, so please check that out. You will not regret it. You can reach out to us us however you'd like. Podcast at dot.ny.gov is the easiest way to do it. That's podcast at dot.ny.gov. So that's it for us here. We will be right back next time on the DOT POD.